Hi everybody, my name is Wahab. We have Tristan and Kevin, and today we're going to show you our 2025 MLB home run predictions through Bayesian analysis.
The purpose of this experiment is to compare multi-level models to Bayesian neural networks by predicting player home run totals for the 2025 MLB season. Neural networks can work with large sets of data and input parameters to make predictive outputs. When comparing these capabilities to a multi-level model, the multi-level model will only work with a smaller subset of that data. This is primarily due to long runtimes during the Markov chain Monte Carlo sampling. Despite this, multi-level models have the added benefit of being able to share and learn about parameters across hierarchical groups. This drove the desire to create two multi-level models with different input sets and compare the difference in predictive capabilities of each. A multi-level model is a Bayesian approach that allows data to be grouped and modeled at different hierarchical groups. These hierarchies, or grouping of the data, are what make a multi-level model so. The key ideas of a multi-level model is that it is able to simultaneously learn about subpopulations of a dataset while also having learned about the entire population of said dataset. These subpopulations are then pooled together by shared characteristics. For this experiment, the two multi-level models will use different baseball stats in an attempt to predict future home run totals of players. The specifics of these stats will be discussed in later slides. More importantly, the multi-level model will allow for the pooling of players with shared characteristics. For example, Shohei Ohtani might be pooled together with other left-handed hitters. The model can then learn about global parameters affecting the home run rate, as well as how being a left-handed hitter adds or subtracts to this home run rate.
Looking at a top-level analysis of our multi-level model, our 2025 home run prediction is going to be made by utilizing historical home run data, which we're using data from the 2019 to the 2023 seasons, and the current home run data, which is primarily consisted of the 2024 season. Our basic model then follows as y sub I is the binomial distribution, where y sub I is the total home runs in ni n sub I plate appearances, and p sub I is our home run probability. The home run probability also satisfies the logistic model, where log of the probability of hitting a home run divided by 1 minus the probability of hitting a home run is equal to beta sub I plus gamma sub I times x sub I, where beta sub I and gamma sub I are regression parameters, and x sub I is the logit of the observed home run rate data. The overall model can be seen to the right with the top two levels outlining our hyperparameters, the third level being the individual player parameters, and the bottom level our new likelihood from these results. In the next couple of charts, we'll dive into further detail on each of these levels. First level I wanted to look at were the hyperparameters or group level parameters. These provide population-wide priors for the intercepts beta and the slope gamma of the logistic regression that predicts home run probability. These parameters also represent the average tendencies across all players. The mean intercept is mu sub beta and can be represented by a normal distribution, and the mean slope is mu sub gamma and is also represented as a normal distribution. Sigma sub beta and sigma sub gamma represent the standard deviation of the intercepts and slopes, capturing how much a player deviates from the overall population mean. These are represented by exponential distributions. Rho is modeled as a uniform distribution, and it affects the covariance matrix sigma, controlling how changes in the intercepts relate to changes in the slopes. The covariance matrix itself allows for shrinkage, meaning that players' parameters are partially pulled towards the overall population values rather than being estimated completely independently. All of those prior hyperparameters feed into our individual player level parameters, beta sub I and gamma sub I. We assume that beta and gamma follow a bivariate normal distribution using mean vectors mu sub beta and mu sub gamma, as well as the covariance matrix sigma. The below is how we coded the bivariate normal distribution in Julia using our means of beta and mean of gamma and incorporating with our covariance matrix sigma. This then yielded us beta and gamma for each individual player. From how we coded it, theta is just a placeholder variable in our code. These player level parameters, beta and gamma, then feed into our likelihood function, where we have two lines of code. First, we compute the logit of our player probability, which is equal to beta sub I plus gamma sub I times the historical home run logit rate of that player. From there, the actual home runs observed follow a binomial distribution based on the number of plate appearances. This means that the probability of a player hitting a home run in a given season is a function of both beta sub I and gamma sub I. Again, with beta sub I being a baseline home run probability and gamma sub I being how strongly their past home run rates might influence their current home run rates. This next section shows how we put together everything in the multi-level model together in Julia. The top section, again, is our group level or hyperparameters, mu sub beta, mu sub gamma, sigma sub beta, sigma sub gamma, and rho. Again, with our means being normal distributions, our sigmas or standard deviations being exponential so that we can keep it positive, and rho being a uniform distribution. We also define our covariance matrix sigma, which we then use in our next section of player level parameters, where we're using the bivariate normal distribution as well as the mu sub beta and mu sub gamma to define our beta and gamma for each individual player. We then calculate the likelihood of these individual player beta and gammas against the historical data. Then outside of this model, we're going to use a no U-turns function to go through a Monte Carlo simulation so that we can get the most accurate betas and gammas for our player level parameters, which will help give us the most accurate home run predictions for 2025 season.
The secondary multi-level model used the same basic model as the first. This model being that the inverse of the logistic function, or the logit function, is applied to the home run rate. This is then used to guarantee the home run rate is between 0 and 1, which then allows the binomial distribution to be used to output total home runs along with the plate appearances. However, instead of using historical home run rates and comparing them with current trends as the first model did, this model groups players based on age, individual offsets, and combines them with exit velocity to be used as the predictor variables. In this model, A and B are global parameters that describe population-wide information in the model. A describes the intercept and is distributed with mean equal to the mean of the logit home run rate and population, and standard deviation equal to the standard deviation of the logit home run rate of the population. B defines the weight of how a player's scaled exit velocity affects home run rate. The scaled exit velocity refers to the fact that the exit velocity of each player was subtracted by the mean of the population, then divided by the standard deviation of the population's exit velocity. This ensured the exit velocity values were around 1 instead of around 90 miles per hour, which meant the B parameter was less sensitive to noise. If this was not done, the B parameter would need to be very small to compensate for the fact that exit velocities are in the high double digits. Sensitivity in the logit function is important as small perturbations can cause drastic effects when taking the logistic function. From here, players were pooled based off an individual offset in addition to being pooled by their age group. For both of these poolings, the standard deviations of these were taken to be weakly informed exponential distributions, meaning they had a mean of 1. Then the player and age effect parameters would be computed with a mean of 0 and standard deviation distributed as described. The groups for this model were then taken to be players less than 23 years old, less than 27 years old, less than 31 years old, less than 36 years old, and greater than 37 years old. The purpose of these ages controlling the pooling is that these ages roughly pools the players into prospect status, developing status, players in their prime, players past their prime, and players rapidly declining, respectively. These parameters just described are then able to be combined, like shown, to get the logit of the home run rate. The B parameter times the scaled exit velocity is combined with player offsets, age offsets, and global intercept. For each player, the binomial distribution is taken with plate appearances and home run rate to generate home runs. Then, when the next season is simulated, an additional year can be added to the player's age, potentially pushing them into the next age group. This can lead to better predictive capabilities about players potentially breaking out or regressing. This is the model that does what the last few slides have just described. Here, the assign age group function assigns an age group to each player in the data frame, and universal variables are computed outside the main sampling function to save runtime. The model inputs priors that have just been described and computes the likelihood based on the specified combination of priors. This model can then be run using the sample function in Julia with the nuts function to generate a posterior distribution.
Before we're able to calculate the 2025 home runs, we also need to be able to simulate how many plate appearances each player would have per season. To do this, we looked at the historical plate appearances from the 2019 to the 2024 seasons, while omitting the 2020 season because that was a shortened season. The plot on the right shows the distribution of plate appearances from the 2019 through the 2024 season. These are all stacked up with 502 plate appearances being the minimum because that's the minimum qualified plate appearances that we were using for our data. Comparing various distributions, this doesn't follow any one distribution exactly. So we were looking at a normal, a Poisson, or a gamma distribution that it most looked like it could follow. We used the Akaike information criteria, or AIC, in order to determine the best fit. You can see the formula here, where K is the number of parameters for the distribution and L is the maximized value of the likelihood function. The lower score for each of these distributions, the better. And in the end, the gamma distribution was the best fit of the three, but the gamma distribution was also in close competition with the normal distribution, with their AIC scores only be a couple points apart. Initially, we were just going to choose random numbers between 502 and the maximum plate appearances ever seen in a season. But we figured that wasn't the most accurate way we could simulate plate appearances for a 25 season, and rather it'd be better if we could simulate following an actual distribution based on our data. So that's why we ended up going with this. Now that we know we wanted to follow a gamma model for our plate appearance sample, we needed to make inferences for alpha and beta. So then we used Bayesian analysis similar to our multi-level model and the no U-turn function to update our plate appearance data from the 2019 to 2024 season in order to obtain an estimated alpha and beta based on our recorded data. Again, we were using a minimum plate appearances of 502 because that's our cutoff for qualified hitters being qualified for the batting title. And our maximum we set at 778, which was the maximum ever plate appearances in the MLB. And then on the right, you could see our sample, our based on the gamma distribution, overlaid against our historical plate appearance data. And you can see it not exactly, but it does closely follow what looks like our historical data there. So now we're finally able to predict the home run rates for 2025. And this slide has our code on how we did that. And I'll kind of go through our for loops here, just kind of defining what we did. So the outer for loop is just cycling through each player. There was a total of 94 eligible players based on data that was available from the 2019 through 2023 season. They had to have some data in that, and they also had to have data from the 2024 season for us to predict. The second for loop here is the one through the sim number, which is the number of seasons we were simulating. We were going to be simulating 500 total seasons, which is that prior distribution for our plate appearances. And then the inner for loop, where we're looking at K, that's the number of simulations that we went through our multi-level model. So we had 3,000 simulations there. So all in all, we're going to have 1,500,000 total data points to work from. So in the inner for loop, we look at our beta samples and our gamma samples that we gathered from the multi-level model, and we multiply that against the historical log at home run rate that each player has. We can then calculate their 2025 home run probability by looking at the logistic of that log at home run rate for 2025 that we calculated. And then we can finally get a home run prediction by taking that home run probability and multiplying it by the number of plate appearances we believe they'll have in this upcoming season. And again, we'll go through those two inner for loops 1,500,000 times for each player. And then we'll input each player's data into an individual vector for them so that we can take a look at various data points, whether it's their median or the 95% credibility interval, and just try to get a representative sample size for each player. Next, we wanted to use an individual player just to highlight some of the results that we were able to get. So on the right, you see a probability distribution function for Aaron Judge. And on the left, you can kind of read out some of our code and some of the lines that we got. So the median amount of home runs, so I guess the 50% credible interval, is 49 home runs next year for Aaron Judge. His mean is 50.1. And we can also see that his 95% credibility interval is between 35 and 67 home runs. And all of these are kind of highlighted in that distribution function to the right. The last thing we wanted to check with our multi-level model was not just intuitively looking past at like previous seasons for our players and their home runs to check like, oh, do these results make sense? But we also wanted to check against a prediction for this year. So we used ESPN's fantasy rankings and took their top 4 fantasy players for this upcoming season and checked their ESPN's predicted home runs against our multi-level models predicted home runs. So we could see that a couple of them line up exactly. Shohei Ohtani, ESPN predicts he'll have 44 home runs. Our median prediction for Shohei Ohtani is 44 home runs. Juan Soto, we're 2 off from our multi-level model. ESPN has 36, we have 34. So all this to just highlight that our multi-level model does closely predict what experts at ESPN think will be the upcoming home run totals for some of the top players in the Major League Baseball.
For the results, the code is run the same as the previous multi-level model. For this model, Aaron Judge's predicted home run total for the next season is 48, which is the mode of the data or the data point that had the highest frequency. This model also predicts we should have a 95% confidence in Aaron Judge hitting between 36 and 65 home runs next year. These are the results for the 2024 home run leaders and how this model's predicted home run totals compare to ESPN's data. There seems to be good correlation between ESPN's numbers and the numbers this multi-level model predicts. The numbers presented are the modes of the data. The modes of the data are compared to ESPN's prediction. Although the power of Bayesian analysis lies in yielding a predictive distribution, ESPN does not have this readily available for comparison.
So in order to understand the Bayesian neural network that our team implemented, we first have to briefly talk about a neural network, a typical neural network. This is not a comprehensive overview. You could study this topic as a PhD if you wanted to. But to just give you a brief overview, a neural network takes in input data with different features describing the data set, like launch angle for Major League Baseball players in our case. And it learns different parameters about the data in order to produce an estimated output. In this case, our output, we want it to be home runs. At a high level, each neuron of the neural network is a number, just one straight number. And to get your output, you multiply different neurons with different input vectors to slowly go through different layers to get to your output. Each neuron, again, is just one number, but it represents a piece of the overall output that's slowly computed. And again, that's home runs in our case. This is a very fundamental concept of machine learning. And at the fundamental level, this architecture is used everywhere, including the ChatGPT. A Bayesian neural network in our case is very similar to a neural network in a lot of ways, but it also differs in a lot of ways too, by incorporating Bayesian analysis as we learned in class. So the actual multiplications of the input vectors with the features that I was talking about earlier with the weight vectors W stay the same. The calculation of the neural network guess is the same for the most part, but the real key difference here are the weight vectors are no longer single numbers. Instead, those weight vectors W are instead probability distributions to represent an entire distribution of possible values. So there's some really good benefits of a Bayesian neural network over a typical neural network, and some of those advantages would be that the Bayesian neural network generalizes really well. So even if you have a new data in the network that it's never seen before, it has a much better chance of giving you a more meaningful answer, whereas a typical neural network might struggle with giving you anything meaningful if it hasn't seen the data before. On that same note, because the weight vectors W are now distributions instead of fixed values, a Bayesian neural network does a better job at preventing overfitting as well, because in a normal neural network, if a weight W had a very large value, then the neural network might rely too much on that singular weight W, which could cause overfitting. That is not at all in the case of a Bayesian neural network because W is no longer a singular number and is instead an entire distribution of values. So previously, if you noticed, in both a Bayesian neural network and a normal neural network, all you're doing is multiplying numbers together to create a lot of vectors. And you can keep doing this, but if you keep doing it this way, I can condense all the layers and multiplications down into a single layer because all you did was model really just a linear relationship, which doesn't really model the complex relationships you might have in society or the world. So in order to model more complex relationships, like in our case, we need to pass our linear values through a nonlinear activation function to help it model more complex nonlinear behavior, like different parameters of Major League Baseball players to predict their home run rate for 2025, which is quite complex and can get quite nonlinear as a relationship. There are a lot of functions you can pick in the research, and you could look through a million different functions, and they all have their benefits and drawbacks. But I picked the tanh activation function in particular because it's centered around 0, which helps the overall Bayesian neural network achieve a more balanced distribution and help prevent extreme values. So here's our team's actual implementation of the neural network. So here it combines what I was talking about in the previous few slides. So the Bayesian neural network takes in the weight parameters and assumes an underlying distribution, similar to a multi-level model. We could think of this as our prior. Then those weight vectors are multiplied by the input features and inputted into the tanh function that I was mentioning earlier. Also, as a side note, a bias is also added to the multiplications to offset the values and improves the model's flexibility to adapt beyond just the input features and weight vectors. But that's just a side note. Once you have all the values from the activation function, those values are then taken into another layer. And as another side note, you can have as many layers as you want. It just depends on how complex you want to make your Bayesian neural network. And more layers doesn't necessarily mean better. Sometimes more layers actually hurt your model performance and makes it overly complex. So it just depends on your specific needs. The output of that second layer, though, is then taken into a likelihood function. This and the original prior distribution I mentioned earlier is a key part of why a Bayesian neural network is called a Bayesian neural network. The likelihood function in our case iterates through each sample in our data set and takes it through a likelihood function. For our purposes, we're choosing a Poisson distribution similar to the multi-level model from the mini project because we're predicting home runs, which are discrete values. Then once we have a posterior distribution function, we can sample it using the nuts function that we've seen before. So this is just a quick slide showing the distributions of the different weight vectors that I was talking about. Normally these would be numbers, but as I was saying before, these are now distributions. So each weight vector W1 with a bracket on each side, 1, 2, 3, 4, they represent individual distributions regarding input features. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So for 1, it's launch angle average. 2, exit velocity average. 3 is barrel batted rate, and 4 is hard hit percent. So it depends on what input features you find valuable and important to represent the home runs, which is what the Bayesian neural network is going to analyze. And finally, here are results. So these projections, they're the same as the multi-level model you saw before with the same players. So ESPN also makes their own predictions for the future on what they predict these players will have. So the predictions from our Bayesian neural network are closer in some cases, but in other cases, it's a bit farther, indicating that we might need to modify the Bayesian neural network parameters a little bit. But more importantly, it also highlights a bit of a shortcoming of Bayesian neural network architectures in general, and that it doesn't explicitly share parameters between players like a multi-level model. So there's no real borrowing attack strength, which is a weakness of the model, especially when there's less data, which a Bayesian neural network absolutely requires more data. So that is a shortcoming, unfortunately, of the model. If you don't have as much data, for a Bayesian neural network, it won't be as successful as a multi-level model.
A comparison of all the models against ESPNs shows that the multi-level model that used historical and recent trends of home run rates was the best predictor, yielding the closest results to ESPNs. The multi-level model that used exit velocity and age falls short, likely due to overestimating player decline based on age. Aaron Judge and Jose Ramirez showed the largest gap between predicted home runs from ESPN's predictions. Both of these players are older in age, around 32 this year, and will be 33 for the 2025 season. However, these are prior home run leaders and star players that tend to perform well for longer in their careers. In the model, this means player-specific offsets predicted by the model were not strong enough. As for the 26-year-old up-and-coming Juan Soto, previous home run totals suggest that last season was an outlier when he hit 41 home runs. This could mean the first multi-level model over-predicted recent trends from home run rate. However, ESPN's predictions seem to disagree with this sentiment in favor of Juan Soto staying at this new higher home run rate. For the Bayesian neural network, its shortcomings were likely due to there not being enough data. Bayesian neural networks are not able to share parameters like a multi-level model, so lots of data is needed to make predictions. Nonetheless, the results from the experiment and comparison of the models were interesting to see and demonstrated the importance that sometimes a simple model can be better than a complex one.